Detective Michael Neely and his police chief Johnny Miller attended a conference and went out for drinks one night. Due to heavy drinking, Mike woke up in police custody with no memory of the previous night. He learned that his police chief had died and he was a suspect in his murder. The detectives questioned Mike about his activities that night, trying to jog his memory. They mentioned his high blood alcohol levels, which likely contributed to his blackout. Mike invoked his right to silence, but the detectives used tactics to keep him engaged. They emphasized the serious charges he was facing and the consequences of his action. They encouraged him to talk by suggesting that they would provide information about what happened. As Mike's confusion and disbelief became evident, he agreed to continue talking to understand the events. The detectives detailed the noises and events reported by witnesses in the hotel, indicating that Mike had been sitting on the chest of the deceased chief. Mike still struggled to recall anything. The detectives asked if Mike had any questions for them and reassured him that they would provide answers in return for his cooperation. Throughout the questioning, Mike's demeanor shifted from initial confusion to a more active participation in trying to piece together the events. He began asking questions and expressed shock over the situation. The detectives offered to provide more information about what happened, hoping to coax more details from Mike. The detectives suggested that Mike was likely to be placed in protective custody in jail, emphasizing that they wanted to ensure his safety. They asked if he intended to harm himself, which he denied. Ultimately, Mike was booked into jail and later sentenced to life in prison for second-degree murder. Despite the severity of his situation, he seemed to accept his fate calmly. The video you're describing seems to depict an incident involving Michael Kyle Dunn, a former chief deputy who was pulled over by a police officer in rural Boone, Arkansas for erratic driving. During the interaction, it becomes clear that Michael Dunn is likely under the influence of alcohol. He attempts to negotiate with the officer and avoid taking a sobriety test, even referencing that he's a law enforcement officer himself. Despite his attempts, he is eventually arrested and placed in the back of the police car. The situation escalates when someone arrives to pick up Michael's truck and informs the officer that Michael's wife has been found dead. This revelation adds another layer of complexity to the situation. The video appears to show the officer grappling with the challenges of the encounter and the unfolding circumstances. As a result of the incident, Michael Dunn was fined and resigned from his position as chief deputy. He was subsequently sentenced to 1 year in prison. The incident highlights the complications that can arise when law enforcement officers find themselves on the other side of the law and the ethical challenges officers may face when dealing with their colleagues in such situations. After decades of investigations, DNA evidence implicated Stephanie Lazarus in a murder that occurred in 1986. The detectives planned the interrogation meticulously, using Stephanie's successful background as a detective and her recent commendation for a theft case to lure her in under the pretense of needing her help on a case. During the interrogation, the detectives attempted to put Stephanie at ease by assuring her that the room was secure from eavesdropping. They brought up the victim's husband, John, with whom Stephanie had a romantic history. Stephanie's anxiety became apparent as her breathing quickened and her language and movements became more defensive and erratic. Stephanie expressed her discomfort with being treated as a suspect, and when asked about providing a DNA sample, she hesitated but eventually agreed, likely hoping that her cooperation would clear her name. However, just 5 minutes later, the detectives decided to arrest her. Months later, Stephanie faced trial, during which the jury found her guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to 27 years in prison for the crime. The case illustrates how careful planning and persistent investigation can lead to the apprehension and conviction of a suspect, even after many years have passed. In a quiet New Jersey town on April 27, 2018, something unexpected happened. New Jersey Police Lieutenant John A. Chu, a respected officer, found himself at the center of a crisis. He was driving his truck erratically along Breakwater Road, dangerously close to Route 9. Concerned neighbors witnessed this erratic behavior and called the police. Little did they know that their boss would be the one causing trouble. This practice, common among law enforcement, was in place to ensure transparency and accountability. The officers began a conversation with Lieutenant Chu, trying to assess the situation. Their concern was evident, knowing they were dealing with their superior. They discussed their body cameras and the importance of keeping them on, a reminder that everything happening would be recorded. As minutes passed, the officers decided it was time to confront Lieutenant Chu. They asked him to step out of the vehicle to determine whether he was fit to operate it. It was a necessary step in ensuring everyone's safety. What followed were sobriety tests that Lieutenant Chu sadly failed. He struggled to maintain balance and coherence, painting a grim picture of his condition. The situation was escalating, and the officers had a duty to uphold the law. Lieutenant Chu resisted cooperating, further complicating the situation. He refused to complete the tests, and tensions were rising. The officers understood the gravity of the situation, as they were now faced with the difficult task of detaining their superior. Reluctantly, the officers had no choice but to detain Lieutenant Chu. It was a challenging moment, and they knew it would have far-reaching consequences. They had to follow the law, regardless of the person involved. Even after detention, Lieutenant Chu challenged the process. He attempted to sit in the front seat of the police car, displaying a disregard for the severity of the situation. The officers tried to reason with him, torn between their duty and respect. In the end, Lieutenant Chu was successfully detained. His actions and decisions that day had consequences he couldn't avoid. He was cuffed and taken to the hospital due to his elevated blood alcohol content, indicating alcohol poisoning. The aftermath was swift and severe. Lieutenant Chu faced suspension, termination from his duty, and a substantial fine. This incident serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder that no one, not even a respected officer, is above the law. This was the story of an officer who lost his way, a vivid example of how crossing the line can lead to a dramatic fall from grace.